talking to people. We're designating.
Like, God damn it, I'm not going to Venezuela. Don't do that. Look at his
It's
face.
all being done right now. We're designating people.
Yeah, Rick Astley. Imagine him like, you were a big part of that psychological warfare. Like, what? Yeah. Ladies and gents, welcome to CG Reaction. This is Trump violated international law. A channel Legal Eagle. Yeah, this is a big channel, near 4 million subscribers. So I've been saying that during Venezuela thing, like, people attack me. I don't get that mentality. Like, I'm not really saying anything. I'm trying to look at this objectively. This does feel weird, and obviously I'm guessing this guy's a lawyer as far as I know, right? And he's saying point blank, yeah, he violated international law. I mean, you don't need to be a lawyer to understand that. So I guess we'll see the details, how he violated a law, or is there a loophole? There must be a loophole. Otherwise, even Trump cannot just point blank say, do this, and they just do it. Like, there are people below him that will be like, no, we can't, we really can't do this. So there must be some loophole. But yeah, it's going to be interesting seeing how this all worked, right? Legally. That's always fun.
Let me save you a click. Everything that Trump did in Venezuela is completely illegal under international law. Whether that makes a difference, well, that remains to be seen. As you may know, on January 3rd, the Trump administration sent troops from multiple branches of the military, along with more than 150 planes and helicopters, to bomb the capital of Venezuela and capture the country's de facto leader, Nicolas Maduro. This violated numerous international laws designed to prevent—
De facto leader, that's a good one. Every time I say he's the president, people are like, he's not the president, he wasn't elected. All right, that's not what I mean. Let's not pick on my words. De facto leader, whether legal or not. Okay, happy? There you go.
exactly this kind of hostile military invasion. Of course, as we covered in our last video on this, now we love regime change. The administration is claiming that this wasn't an invasion, it was just a kinetic action in support of a law enforcement mission, with Chinooks, Blackhawks, and Delta Force soldiers. Or alternatively,
See, again, Russia could just claim, like we said, it's not an invasion, it's special military operation that's still ongoing, just like yours was. Again, it's not apples to apples, but that's how water gets muddied, isn't it?
contradiction, it was an act of self-defense. But spoiler, these justifications are unlikely to hold up. The UN Charter is binding law and it forbids the use of in very narrow circumstances. And the president is obligated to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. Now, while international law is binding, it's not enforceable in the same way as US criminal law. Sometimes it seems like states violate international law with impunity, and that's why some of you have asked, why even bother with international law?
Yeah, law is only there if you can enforce it. How are you going to enforce international law? I don't know, by groups and treaties and by military? Who has the biggest military?
Or international bodies like the United Nations if there's no way to enforce that law. But here's the deal. The UN was created after 2 world wars killed at least 100 million people. Obviously, everyone wanted some kind of process that would prevent that kind of worldwide conflict from ever happening again. But nations obviously didn't want to give up their sovereignty. And the UN was the best structure that they could come up with to balance those interests. So there is no world police. But international law is supposed to encourage mutual restraint and prevent every conflict from being reduced to might makes right, which you might not know given that the administration is currently saying might makes right. The basic idea is that countries generally follow the rules when they expect other countries to do the same. And sometimes there are consequences for violations of international law, like sanctions, diplomatic isolation, or even war. And these can be imposed by the United Nations or by the International Criminal Court. But what makes a war illegal and unjust under international law? Well, international law bans wars launched to seize territory, overthrow governments, or to fix another country's domestic problems. These are often called wars of aggression or wars of conquest. And so the UN Charter sharply limits when states are allowed to use force. Article 2, Section 4 says, quote, all members shall refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. That means annexation or occupation of territory by force is illegal. So Russia, in annexing Crimea in 2014 and later launching a full-scale invasion in 2022, is exactly the kind of conduct that Article 2.4 expressly forbids.
Hold up there. So they put out a wanted for Putin, like he's wanted by international court or something. So he can't really leave Russia and go to one of the places where he can get arrested. But that should happen now. That didn't happen when he captured Crimea completely. That didn't violate anything. So I guess there is a level of severity. Who's Putin? Oh, he's like, like leader of Russia. And Russia is one of the big military powers. So how far can they go before I'll enact a law? Is that how things work? Yeah, you can take Crimea. That's not big enough to like put a warrant against Putin. Invade an entire country? Yeah, that is.
And of course, we can't talk about it in this video, but you can bet that we will be talking about Trump's plan to annex Greenland under roughly the same rules.
We need it for national security. We have to have it.
But for now, the United States has conducted airstrikes, captured the head
I
of...
literally watched a video, check out, like link in the system. It's like just I reacted yesterday. You basically have rights to put military, any type of military in Greenland anywhere. You probably, in your base, you probably will have more people than there are people in Greenland. So it's like you don't really need to capture it.
State and announced it would be governing the country. This is the very definition of violating the territorial integrity and independence of a sovereign state. And look, Maduro is a very bad guy who oppressed the people of Venezuela, stole elections, and forced over 7 million people to flee the country and torched their economy. But the Trump administration is taking that one step further and arguing that because they were just trying to arrest a criminal dictator, bombing and invading a sovereign nation of Venezuela doesn't constitute an act of war. Trump's ambassador to the UN, which I was surprised to learn that we actually still have one, said, quote,
"We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades."
And in the Trump administration's post-hoc war powers resolution notification to Congress, he also claimed that the invasion of Venezuela was, quote, in furtherance of the successful apprehension, arrest, and transfer of Maduro. But the thing is, there's no legal basis for this argument. International law allows countries to have some jurisdiction over offenses committed abroad, but that can only be exercised in the country's own territory. So the US could have arrested Maduro for his drug crimes under US law if he had, say, flown to Palm Beach to enjoy some sunshine and hospitality at Mar-a-Lago. But if the US wants to arrest a foreign national in
Is that the case? Because laws can sometimes be very linear and then you put nuance on it. So if you're wanted by international law and then US and FBI basically capture that person, is that really illegal? Can you really put like, yeah, but you didn't capture it on US land? Usually that's implied because otherwise you just have to go to war, which is a problem. You can't just attack everything just to capture one guy. But that's not what US did. US literally walked their ass inside and captured and like bring him back. So is there like specific legality there? Like you can't really capture anyone outside of your land. Because I'm pretty sure he was captured because of international law and not just by US law. If it's only because of US law, yeah, it doesn't really make sense. Venezuela doesn't recognize US law. But international law, the international treaty under UN, that might be different, right?
another country's territory, it has to have the consent of that country. Without consent, a law enforcement action in another country's territory violates that country's territorial sovereignty and usurps the governmental law enforcement authority of that country. Now, you might think that these actions would doom any criminal prosecution of Maduro in the United States. That's probably not the case. We are working on another video to talk about what happens when Maduro is tried in the United States, but there is a long line of cases called the Kerr-Frisbee cases that actually say as long as the person is in the United States, the criminal courts can prosecute them, even if they were kidnapped and renditioned to the country. It's a little shocking, but that's...
Yeah, but that's under U.S. law. U.S. law can just say it. Yeah, we have a prosecutor. Who, what, that kind of thing.
Seems to be the law going back over 100 years. Scary. But at any rate, these standards of territorial integrity apply equally to all members of the United Nations. So one can only imagine the rap sheet that China might have on Trump, but that doesn't mean that they can bomb Washington, D.C., deploy troops to capture him, and bring him to Chinese justice. That would be an act of war, not a law enforcement operation. But if the "it isn't really a war" argument fails, the Trump administration is setting up a second pillar of legal justification. Even if it was an act of war, it was done in self-defense. Now, every country on Earth responded to the invasion by...
Okay, look, if it's an act of war, that means a country has to recognize it's an act of war. The vice president, that's probably going to be president, the Nobel Peace Prize one. If she's sucking up to Trump now, clearly she's not saying yeah, you did the war thing. If the country doesn't recognize it as an act of war, is it an act of war?
Calling for the preservation of international law. I'm absolutely fascinated by how this response is being covered by the media. Depending on which sources you follow, you might come away thinking you're watching entirely different events unfold, and that's the real danger. Facts don't shape public opinion, framing does. And with a story this world-changing developing this fast across hundreds of outlets, it's nearly impossible to get the full picture without the right tools. And that's why I rely on Ground News, the sponsor.
Yeah, well, go to original video page link, and from there support this channel.
or I'll see you in court. Now, there are several circumstances when a country is allowed to legally go to war, including self-defense, UN authorization, or consent. Now, the UN definitely didn't authorize this, so let's just skip right to the other possible exceptions. Article 51 of the UN Charter allows a state to use force to respond to an armed attack. The strictest interpretation of self-defense is that if someone attacks you, you can fight back. But there's an ongoing debate about whether states can use force to stop an attack preemptively before it occurs. During the so-called War on Terror, the United States took the position that force is lawful to stop an imminent attack. But what's imminent? Well, one interpretation was that if a missile is in the air, you get to shoot it down. You don't have to let the missile destroy a city in order to defend your territory.
Yeah, again, I see the technicality there. You can really claim reasons for national security, which US has been doing since Cold War, and that might as well be like, if we don't address this, our country will fall. Now, he probably did the similar thing with Maduro, like, yeah, this is for national security. If Maduro is not captured because of all the drugs and things destabilizing economy, we'll all be killed type of way. So I guess he can justify based on that.
If an army is amassing on your border, you can defend yourself by attacking that army. With the advent of weapons of mass destruction, though, some states argued that if another country is in the process of developing weapons of mass destruction, attack is imminent, and it's therefore legitimate to use force to stop them. The George W. Bush administration pushed this concept to its limits, asserting the force could even be used to prevent grave and gathering dangers. But the Trump administration—
I guess you can pick and choose. They're not that fast with North Korea, I guess. North Korea is constantly be like, yeah, we're going to bomb USA, this and that, we have nuclear bombs. US is like, it's probably going to be fine.
Is now pushing that even farther. In his letter to Congress, Trump argued that he had ordered the invasion to, quote, protect United States citizens both at home and abroad because Venezuela under Maduro possesses a substantial danger to the United States. In comments to the UN, U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz cited Article 57 of the UN Charter, which enshrines the right to self-defense. Waltz argued that Maduro was, quote, the head of a vicious foreign terrorist organization, Cartel de los Soles. This regime-sponsored enterprise coordinates with and relies on other vicious criminal organizations, namely Tren de Aragua, again, among others, to carry out its objective of using illegal narcotics as a weapon against the United States. He claimed that Tren de Aragua, with Maduro's backing and protection, quote, unlawfully infiltrated the United States and are conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile actions against the American people and against the United States. So the administration's basic theory is that Maduro has been attacking the United States by flooding the country with drugs and violent gangs. Therefore, Trump had to send troops and more than 150 military aircraft into Venezuela and bomb its capital. Now, this just doesn't pass the smell test for a myriad of reasons. First, it relies on an unproven connection between Maduro and the cartels, but the administration hasn't provided any proof that Maduro was actually directing any of the cartels, or even that Venezuela was actually a source of fentanyl, which it doesn't seem like they are. Second, this argument likens the drug trade to a military invasion, which is entirely unprecedented and almost certainly wrong. The closest corollary is the George H.W. Bush administration's 1989 to 1990 invasion of Panama. And in his address to the United Nations, Waltz explicitly—
Yeah, but do they have to, though? And even if they have to, like, again, there are like many loose things here. First of all, UN. Most of the UN countries are kind of like NATO countries, most of the powerful one at least. NATO relies in US. UN's office is in New York. I guess this is one of the reasons why Putin has always been paranoid. Because UN rules and international laws will only apply as far as Americans want to. And at least that's what he thinks. And you can kind of see that with this, right? And this is not at that level. But even if it happens at that level, what is UN going to do? UN is mostly reliant on US. That's what I'm saying, right? And that is one of the fears of like other powers like China, Russia. Now, they might use that as an excuse to say, oh, we don't trust UN and USA. But you see where that's coming. You see where the smoke is.
referenced the Panama invasion. But this is not the Panama situation. We covered this a little bit in our last video on Venezuela, but to go into a little bit more detail because it's relevant to international law, on December 15, 1989, Noriega publicly declared that a state of war existed between Panama and the United States. Within days of this announcement by Noriega, President George H.W. Bush directed roughly 20,000 United States service members into combat in Panama for the stated purposes of, quote, safeguarding American lives, restoring democracy, preserving the Panama Canal treaties, and seizing Noriega to face federal drug charges in the United States. And the ensuing military conflagration resulted in significant casualties and property loss among Panamanian civilians. Now, Noriega lost control over Panama during this armed conflict and ended up seeking sanctuary inside of the Apostolic Nunciature of the Holy See, the de facto embassy of the Holy See in Panama. But American service members surrounded the Nunciature, and the U.S. Army turned to psychological warfare,
Blasting speakers. This shit was next level.
blaring disturbing chicken noises at deafening levels, gunning the engines of armored vehicles against the Nunciature's fence, and setting fire to a neighboring field and bulldozing it to create a helicopter landing zone. Reportedly, the version of the song I Fought the Law, performed by The Clash, was played repeatedly along with You Shook Me All Night Long by AC/DC and Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses. Other songs in the lineup were Too Old to Rock and Roll by Jethro Tull, Panama by Van Halen, and believe it or not, Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. That's right, the US Army
Yeah, Rick Astley. Imagine him like, you were a big part of that psychological warfare. Like, what? Yeah.
rolled a foreign dictator before it was cool. And after almost 2 weeks, Noriega surrendered. Noriega was then brought to Miami to face the pending federal charges.
Look at his face.
Now, even with that declaration, though,
His face is like, I'm tired, man. I can't do this.
legal experts argued that Bush's invasion of the country was illegal because Panama didn't actually pose an imminent threat to the United States. And of course, neither did Venezuela. Venezuela's military folded within a couple of hours under the force of a tiny fraction of the United States military. And Maduro may have taunted Trump with some, let's be honest, hilarious imitations of Trump's dance moves, but he never declared an actual war.
Yeah, there was a whole headline and news, reliable enough source, that literally said Trump's last straw was his dancing. Why would you taunt Trump at this scale, especially if you like military action against United States might be the thing? Why would you taunt Trump? That doesn't even make sense. He was literally acting like I'm invincible. It literally took you like a few hours. What invincibility are you talking about?
Or demonstrated any intention to attack the United States. A dance battle is not an attack that justifies military self-defense, and You've Been Served is not a legally recognizable attack that justifies a military invasion. So self-defense is not going to excuse the Trump administration's invasion of Venezuela. That being said, apart from needing an international law justification for their actions, the Trump administration also needed domestic legal authority to conduct their actions. And one of the scarier and dumber ways that they seem to be doing it is saying that they are allowed to enforce U.S. criminal laws using the FBI, and they needed the military to protect the FBI when they were going in to arrest Nicolas Maduro. Of course, the FBI wouldn't be able to
All
go.
of that. This is so fucked up. Can they use the same excuse inland? Imagine you have some scenario where FBI comes with a fucking military and A1 Abrams tank in your own land, in your city. And the excuse would be, oh, we were just afraid the FBI might become under attack, so we just use military as a protection service. Okay, military attacks have started now by government inside your own country. Now you'd say, like, yeah, but they're criminal. You're not in front of court yet. Capturing somebody is not the same as judging them. So until they're proven guilty, they're innocent. And you use military for that. So I'm not saying that will happen. At least this sets a precedent, isn't it?
Go in without the military. So you can see that this is one of the bootstrappiest bootstrap arguments that has ever tried to tautologically justify anything. It's just self-defense turtles all the way down. But there is another route that's even more craven. It's possible that once they have their puppet government in place, the Trump administration will try to claim another exception to Article 2, Section 4, consent. A state can consent to the use of force by a foreign country. But this is often used by aggressor states to try to justify entirely unconsensual invasions. Russia, for example, has claimed that it had consent to intervene in Ukraine. Putin claims that Ukrainian separatists, including some with Russian heritage, invited Russia to occupy the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. This was bogus, though, because a state cannot manufacture a legal justification for war by destabilizing part of another country and then claiming the right to intervene on their behalf. In Panama, too, the H.W. Bush administration tried to argue that because the country's citizens had voted overwhelmingly against Noriega in a prior election, there was consent to invade the country and capture Noriega. In his War Powers report, George H.W. Bush argued that the invasion was, quote, welcomed by the democratically elected government of Panama. And U.S. Ambassador Thomas Pickering...
Again, what gives the US the authority? Same thing with Maduro. Yeah, Maduro wasn't elected, but that's Venezuelans' problem. Again, Venezuelans happy. I'm talking in principle. I'm not defending Maduro or anything like that, but on principle, US can't just say that guy wasn't democratically elected, so it's our right to invade that country. US is not international police. They might act like it, but they are not. World is not USA and everything is not US's vessel. I mean, that's weird justification.
Pickering told the UN Security Council, quote, United States action in Panama has been approved, applauded, and welcomed by the democratically elected government of Panama. Now, since the Trump administration is explicitly likening this invasion to the Panama invasion, it's possible that Trump too will argue that by voting against Maduro, the people of Venezuela were somehow endorsing a US military invasion to remove him. But that also doesn't seem to pass the smell test. In 1989, the UN rejected the H.W. Bush administration's arguments about self-defense and consent and condemned the US, stating that the UN, quote, strongly deplores the intervention in Panama by the armed forces of the United States of America, which constitutes a flagrant violation of international law and of the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of states, and demanded that the US cease its military actions there. So it's unlikely that the invasion itself will be legally justifiable, either as a law enforcement action or under any of the three typical exceptions for war. There is an even bigger legal problem, though, because Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have made it clear now that the US intends to take control of the country and, quote, run it. This opens up a whole bunch of other legal issues. Trump made a surprise—
fuck it. Capture a country without capturing a country. Claim that I'm gonna run it without asking their people. Yeah.
announcement in his January 3rd press conference. That's right, the United States is going to be running Venezuela for the foreseeable future. This sounds familiar.
Are you going to designate a U.S. official to coordinate?
It's all being done right now. We're designating people. We're talking to people. We're designating.
Like, God damn it, I'm not going to Venezuela. Don't do that.
It's all being done right now. We're designating people. We're talking to people.
I'm not going there.
Various people, and we're going to let you know who those people are.
And it sounds exactly like an occupation. And under the Hague regulations, quote, territory is considered occupied when it is actually placed under the authority of the hostile army. And according to the Department of Defense Law of War Manual, when a foreign government establishes its own governmental authority for the country it has conquered or creates a temporary government in that country, that's an occupation. And in their January 3rd press conference, President Trump and Secretary Rubio stated that they had sworn in Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, as the new president of Venezuela. And in an interview in The Atlantic, President Trump proclaimed, quote, if she doesn't do what's right, she's going to pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro. Which sounds a lot
Bigger than Maduro? She's gonna get shot? What is bigger than getting arrested?
like the administration is either establishing its own governmental authority or at least setting up an interim government. But it could also be argued that this is just a continuation of the original Maduro regime, which is a bit of a catch-22, because if Maduro was in power illegally, then his vice president would also be in power illegally, and so none of it is legitimate. I don't even know what's going on here. But under international law, occupying powers have a long list of obligations, including duties to provide food, medical care, and protection to the people in the territories they occupy. In other words, you broke it, you bought it.
Occupy what? US came, captured Maduro and left. They didn't attack Venezuelan military. They didn't take out Venezuelan checkpoints. USA did not invade Venezuelan land and capture it. You can't just take out a president and it's like, yeah, I control it now. I get it, you control it by blockade and shit. Economical blockade. It's like Julius Caesar's strategy. Either give up or I'm going to starve you. But that's still, technically, you're still not in control. You didn't take the land. So technically you can say like, yeah, we're going to run the country. I guess this is all like indirect, right? Because she's going to come and say like, yeah, okay, I'm vice president. Now I'm acting president. And yeah, we'll do what Trump wants. So technically it becomes that, I don't know.
But by deposing Maduro, invading and occupying Venezuela, Trump has put the United States on the hook for a bunch of responsibilities under international law. The Hague Regulations, Geneva Conventions, and Department of Defense Manual also state plainly that pillage is—
Yeah, but that's for point-blank invasion and capture like Iraq. They didn't do that here. This is all indirect. They didn't literally invade Venezuela and take it over. There are no US troops that are occupying Venezuela right now.
Is prohibited. Pillage is the, quote, systematic and violent appropriation by members of the armed forces of movable property or private property that belongs either to the persons protected by humanitarian conventions or to the adverse state or party itself. And pillage is considered a war crime, which makes this seem pretty illegal. Forcing a country to turn over millions of barrels of oil, or alternatively, handing over the entire industry to US companies.
Yeah, but they didn't just say like, we're going to take the oil. They say we are being a businessman. We're going to give money to Venezuela and US will make money as well. So there are very technicalities at work here. They didn't just take the oil. That's the thing.
With the protection of the US military sounds a lot like appropriation of public or private property. And don't even get me started about how Trump says he's going to take the proceeds from these sales and use it as an executive slush fund instead of turning over the funds to Congress for appropriations, which is, you know,
What the fuck? Controlled by me, all right? There is benefit people who have an energy security risk right to execute this plan. Imagine have we take a storage ships, product, dogs. Okay.
slush fund instead of turning
Yeah, money will be controlled by me. He didn't just say, I'll take the fucking money. He'll give it to Venezuela just because of legalities. I mean, pennies on dollar probably, but still.
over the funds to Congress for appropriations, which is, literally the entire controversy of the Iran-Contra scandal. But as we've seen over the past year, the law is only as good as enforcement. So in an ideal world, what are the potential consequences for this kind of invasion and occupation? Well, first, the UN Security Council could impose sanctions on countries in an attempt to maintain peace.
Every time he says UN, I immediately remember that line from Dave Chappelle's skit. UN with what army? Go sell some medicine, bitches. What is UN going to do?
Those can include trade restrictions, arms embargoes, and travel bans. Unfortunately, as a member of the Security Council, the US has veto power, so unless the Trump administration decides to sign off on sanctions against the United States, the UN is not going to deal out any consequences here. Additionally, under the Rome Statute, the International Criminal Court could also potentially launch some investigations and prosecutions. The ICC has jurisdiction over war crimes, which includes, quote, extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly, and, quote, destroying or seizing the enemy's property unless such destruction or seizure may be imperatively demanded by the necessities of war. And the ICC's list of war crimes also includes no quarter orders and killing or wounding a combatant who, having laid down his arms or having no longer means of defense, has surrendered at discretion, which may apply to the hundreds of Venezuelans who were killed in the Trump boat strikes. And the ICC has jurisdiction over acts of aggression, which the Rome Statute defines as, quote, the planning, preparation, initiation, or execution by a person in a position effectively to exercise control over or to direct the political or military action of a state of an act of aggression, which, by its character, gravity, and scale, constitutes a manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, the United States is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, but Venezuela is a party to the Rome Statute, so it's theoretically possible that they could ask for investigation and prosecution by the ICC. There are two caveats, though. First, because the new government of Venezuela is going to effectively be under the control of the Trump administration, there probably isn't going to be anyone left to appeal to the ICC. And second, the American Service Members Protection Act, passed in the wake of 9/11, essentially gives U.S. military personnel, politicians, and appointed officials immunity against criminal prosecution by international criminal courts.
Yeah, look, man, Venezuela is not going to ask for this because they don't want to piss off Trump. ICC is not going to do anything to America because you don't want to piss off America. USA is like, it is like one of those like movies where there is like a very rich, powerful overlord. Basically, mayor does nothing, judges do nothing because it's too powerful. He owns most of the city. That is USA.
And the act allows the president to take, quote, all means necessary and appropriate to bring about the release of any U.S. or allied personnel being detained or imprisoned by, on behalf of, or at the request of the International Criminal Court. This is why the act was nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act, because it basically authorizes the president to invade the seat of the ICC to prevent U.S. personnel or politicians from being prosecuted or detained by the ICC. So as a practical matter, it's unlikely that anyone involved in this will face any real consequences, at least during this administration, even though pretty much everyone outside of the administration agrees it was completely illegal. But UN Security Council membership in the Hague Invasion Act aren't going to protect the United States from international and even domestic condemnation.
Oh God, he put out a good point. What if next election a Democratic president comes? That happens a lot. What if entire Congress, Senate, and everything turns to Democrat? And what if Democrats run everything? Would they vigorously come after Trump and his people, Rubio and everyone, vice president, like you all are war criminals? I mean, they would do that, I think. I mean, they did it, like impeached him multiple times. Or would they be like, okay, let's not set a precedent where a president is prosecuted later because we don't want future president to be weak and shaken when he needs to make decision. There is that element as well. But would they, with this kind of a struggle between Republicans and Democrats, would they think like that?
Even the U.S.'s usual allies have criticized Trump's invasion of Venezuela, and that criticism is likely to grow even louder now that the Trump administration is threatening to annex Greenland, take over Cuba, do something about Mexico, and take out the leader of Colombia. So,
How to do something in Mexico? Mexico, what the fuck, man? I was helping you. What are you talking about? We did this boat thing together. Did you really help? Yeah, I was there. You saw me in the background. Come on.
Yeah, Team America, world police, but dumb. Now, all this highlights why it's so important to get a great lawyer when you're dealing with your own case. Now, after I started this channel, every week
Yeah, well, go to regional web page link and support this channel. This is the first time I'm watching this channel. It was interesting topics, man. I like watching, legality topics like this, because people find loopholes all the time, and sometimes a rule is only stronger as much you can enforce it, and willingness to enforce it. So nothing's gonna happen probably. But yeah, there will be precedents that are set, which is kind of like you really have to think about. But there you go. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. You'll be really helping out this channel. And if you want me to do more reactions like this, comment down, and I'll see you next time.